If you are a man and you are experiencing erection challenges, whether it's getting hard, whether it's staying hard, then you're in the right place. Often, when we're experiencing this, we can just feel like we're alone and we're the only ones going through it. But actually, this video today is to show you the opposite of that.
So Shay and I have both been through this, and we've both been helping men through this for a long time. And the American Urological Association says that 30 million men in the United States alone have this problem, and who knows how many worldwide. So if you're watching this, you're in good company and you're not alone.
So today, Cam and I are going to share our personal stories. So this will be our vulnerable moments as well. And the reason why we chose to do that is because it's really rare that we hear two guys coming together to share what their challenges were with erections. So we're going to do that with full transparency so that you know that you're not alone. And also, as Cam said, we've both worked with hundreds of guys around the world by now to help them get this sorted. And there are definite patterns, clues, things that we have seen that come up that lead to erection challenges. And so we're going to share those with you as well so that you know ultimately how to start getting this fixed so that you can feel normal again. From my side, let's say going back to younger years, teenage years, things were fine. But I didn't realize that I was actually developing quite a bad relationship with sex in terms of hookups and seeking a lot of validation through sex, feeling good enough through sex. On paper, my life was great. So before I do what I do now, I had a 15-year career in banking and consulting. So that was good. Looked like I had my shit together. Everything was going well. But actually, internally, and in terms of relationships and dating, I was really struggling. It hadn't yet turned into erection challenges and performance anxiety. I didn't know that that's the direction it was going in, but that's what was happening. Fast forward a few years, and in 2018, was a significant year for me. My dad passed away, and it made me just reevaluate my whole life. And so I decided to quit my corporate job and put a backpack on and travel the world. And that just totally opened my mind to, in so many different ways, but culturally just helped me to get back in touch with who I was actually. And I'd kind of lost sight of that a bit. But at the same time, I realized I didn't want to go back into that same career of banking. And I knew I wanted to be my own boss. And I was trying to start multiple businesses based on what I knew so far, and they weren't working. And the next one wasn't working, and the next one wasn't working. And I started to get highly frustrated with myself. And this really surprised me because I actually didn't really feel like I was an angry, upset person, but these were some of the emotions that were 100% showing up. And during this time as well, that relationship with sex and porn had also started to get even worse as well. Over the years, that just stacked. And now it was showing up as performance challenges. So not being able to get hard or not being able to stay hard. There'd been multiple embarrassing, awkward experiences of where this had happened. And I didn't want to talk to anybody about it because I felt like nobody would get it, that it was just my thing. Nobody else had these challenges. Everybody else, all these other guys, they could probably have sex in the way that they wanted to. They probably didn't have any issues with this. It's just me. And that basically just reached a tipping point. In parallel with that, I was also working with a coach around my business to figure out, what's going on here? Why is this not going to plan in the way that I thought it would? And then it wasn't until month 11 of that 12-month coaching package that I mentioned anything to do with my personal life and said, okay, look, I have some challenges that's going on here. And I don't know why I feel frustrated. I don't know why I feel this emotional about what's happening. And the coach basically took me through an exercise that helped me realize that all of this frustration, all of this, these issues with self-esteem, which I never thought I had any issues with self-esteem. I thought I was a very confident guy. I knew the direction I wanted to go in life. And when I had to do this exercise, it basically showed that my self-esteem was through the floor. And that in that moment, I can't really describe what happened, but in that moment, it was like a slap around the face, massive slap around the face. And I just realized, I saw that the root of all of this emotion, this anger, this frustration, this upset was all related to what was going on in the bedroom, my relationship with sex, because sex, it's not just sex, right? It's how we connect with other people.
Yeah.
And that was such an important part of my life. But at the same time, I wasn't able to do it in the way that I wanted to. I wasn't able to get it right.
Would your friends have known that you were dealing with self-esteem issues at that time?
No, no, but nobody, literally nobody. I didn't even know.
Yeah, yeah, I was the same way. Most
I
people
didn't even
would have
know.
called me confident. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I had convinced myself that I was, I didn't have any self-esteem challenges there, no inner confidence issues or whatever that I had to work through. But yet the reality was so opposite from that. It was a massive blind spot that clearly I'd built many, many shields around, barriers. And when I realized that this was all related to what was going on in the bedroom, basically, or a significant, like 80, 90% of this emotion was related to what was going on in the bedroom, this frustration and the upset and the anger, is when I made the commitment of, okay, I have to figure this out for myself. I have to get this fixed for myself. And then that's when I knew that I wanted to also help other guys to be able to do the same. And then from that point on, it was a 3, 4 year journey of working with some of the best coaches around the world, but taking the tools that worked, what didn't work, and getting it sorted for myself. And then, of course, starting to help guys do the same a few years after that, but in a much smaller time scale, rather than it taking years, which is what I went through, and I think similar to yourself as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I'd say that's my story in short. And just to summarize, it was many years spent of not talking about this, many years of not even accepting myself that there was some kind of challenge going on there, and just trying to push through, despite it not working.
Yeah. There's a lot of similarities in our stories. I had a pretty successful career in IT. I worked at a Fortune 500 company. I had a very high, about as high up a position as I could have had for being a 27-year-old. And I had a fancy car. I had the blonde hair, blue eyed girlfriend that society kind of convinced me was the right thing. I didn't quite have the white picket fence, but I felt like I should have been. I felt like I should be happy. I thought I was happy. I think one of the things that's most interesting about both of our experiences is that I didn't know I wasn't happy,
Yeah.
and other people in my life didn't know either, which is kind of the crazy thing about it. And, some things that were different about our stories is that I never really had the like lots of hookups and stuff like that. I was really insecure about sex. I had a porn addiction from a very young age. And, I always had an issue. Like I could get women to be interested in me, like emotionally, but like there was always something really weird around sex that I didn't understand. And so it oftentimes prevented me from ending up with the women that I wanted. And even the woman that I dated in college for a very long time, who was a very sweet, wonderful woman, but for some reason I didn't respect her because she liked me. Like for some reason that to me was like I can laugh about it now, but like it was a really, really bad situation, in the sense of like, if somebody is interested in you and you find that to be a flaw, like that should have been a clue that something was wrong. But it took me a long time to sort of figure out that something was going on. And then, I say this, Shay and I had a conversation the other day and I mentioned this to him, but I say this a lot, is that losing my erections was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was sort of a wake up call, sort of life shaking me and being like, look, you need to look at yourself. Something's going on. And, my first instinct when I started losing erections was to pretend like it didn't happen and,
Yeah.
blame it on booze. And, but eventually it started to be, it became clear that this was a consistent problem. And then my next reaction, which I've run into with a lot of guys, is that I just started avoiding relationships. So I would sort of do these like push pull dynamics with women where I would get to know them, we'd get close, and then like things should turn to a sexual place. And then all of a sudden I'd push them away for no reason. And it sounds dumb, but I also like, I wasn't just not honest with myself about the fact that I had, that I wasn't happy or that I was insecure, but I also wasn't really honest with myself initially about the fact that I had a problem with erections. I remember the first moment I was actually honest with myself about it, I started crying. Um, and it was, just in some ways it was relieving because it was like, okay, now I can look at this. And then I sort of went on the normal path of, I went to doctors, I did therapy, didn't get anything. I got offered surgery. I knew that wasn't for me. Like I had a,
Like an
um,
implant.
yeah, I had a urologist offer me an implant, which one of the reasons my business is called No Pills, No Surgery is because, those were the two options that were basically given to me. And, um, I wasn't going to take the surgery. And so, I had a very logical mind at that point. Working in IT, I was a very staunch atheist. But I was just desperate enough that I also sort of went on my own little quest. I went down, started drinking ayahuasca in Peru without really understanding what it was, which was the first real indication to me that what was going on was emotional. And it sounds so obvious now. Like when I look back on it, it's like, of course, like, how could it not have been? But I didn't have that. I didn't have enough self awareness to see it. And once I sort of realized, like, oh, it's emotional, um, I became really, really motivated to fix it at that point because I think before I went to Peru, I didn't realize that it was fixable. I think I just sort of assumed that I was going to be like this forever. I was going to be alone. I would probably never have a relationship. I would never have the sex life I wanted. And that was really depressing. So it pushed me into really bad depression. And my next step from there was I went and lived in a monastery for almost 3 years. And that really helped me sort out like just what was going on internally and start watching the relationship between my mind and this problem. And eventually it just became really obvious. Like in hindsight, the signs were kind of always there, but I was just too messed up emotionally to see it. And so, once I actually got clarity on it, it wasn't that difficult to fix it. And I think that's the thing that, you mentioned this, and I want to reiterate this to guys. Like we both spent years trying to fix this problem, and
Mhm.
realistically, guys fix it in a few months.
Yep.
It's not the. I think one of the big things that keeps a lot of guys stuck is they misunderstand, like because it's so painful, they think that the solution must be really difficult or not accessible. And in reality, it's just because it's painful doesn't mean it's like extremely difficult to fix. It's
Yeah.
not like there's no like instant quick fix. You do have to put in a little effort, but like the reward is so worth it because
Mm.
you mentioned that sex is like it's not just about sex. It's about how you connect with people, and sex is so intertwined with our self-esteem and
Mm.
who we are as men. And when that part of your life isn't healthy, it makes every other part of your life unhealthy. So, um,
Mm.
I think I love the fact that I can have sex whenever I want. Like that's a great feeling, but like the gift that really came out of all of this and why it's the best thing that ever happened to me is because I was miserable and I didn't know it. And now like I've faced a lot of like internal pain and I've like learned about like what makes me happy and what makes me unhappy. What do I actually need in order to have healthy relationships? And I wasn't capable of having a healthy relationship when I had this problem. And I think a lot of
Right.
guys that are struggling with it, they don't realize that it's intertwined with their relationships too. So yeah, if you're
Yeah.
struggling with this right now, you're watching this, like it's fixable. Trust me. Um, trust Shay. Like we're proof.
Yeah.
That keeping it to yourself is literally just wasted time.
Yeah.
If you lost an erection for the first time and you got on a call with either Shay or I'd be willing to bet you would never lose another erection again, or very,
Mhm.
very high likelihood that you would never turn into like having a serious problem.
Mhm.
The the problem becomes big because you ignore it.
Yeah.
I think I was so afraid that there wasn't a solution.
Mhm.
Um, like because I think one of the things that really took place for me during this is that the way I looked at life and the world really changed. And the way that I was looking at life during that, you know, to me, sex was very transactional. I didn't even though I had a long term girlfriend who I loved, even though I loved her during those experiences of sex, there was no emotion for me. I didn't understand the emotional part. And so the lens that I was sort of looking through life, there wasn't a solution possible. And so I think that really made me afraid to try. And I would also agree that, like, there's just a lot of uncomfortable things that need to be faced, but it's not the pain of facing them compared to the pain of spending years not facing them is just crazy. It's so much better to just face it. I've worked with clients who've had this problem for 40 years. And I've also had multiple clients who initially reached out to me and then didn't work with me for several years and then came back later and were like, I wish I'd just done it. It was literally wasted time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I face it. There's
Yeah.
no like, there's nothing you can do other than face it that will make it better. And
Yeah.
you have two paths in front of you. You're guaranteed to have pain in both of them. Facing it is painful, and not facing it is painful, but only one of them has the possibility to actually get you what you want.
Very true. A question I was asking myself so much was, why can't I get this right? And this wasn't just in sex, this was in business as well. Why can't I get this right? And it was just pressure, pressure, pressure. There any other questions that come to mind for you, like thinking back to when things felt at rock bottom? What were you saying to yourself?
I think, I mean, I was a very brutal person to myself.
Hmm.
I would call myself a loser, and I was extremely, extremely hard on myself. I had no compassion at all for myself, just because I was always a bit of a type A personality, and it was always kind of like forge ahead with something. But this is like a problem that was too big for just pushing in the way that I was used to. I think the one that came to my mind a lot is, am I broken?
Yeah.
I think broken is really a word that felt that described how I felt a lot, and so I thought a lot about being broken.
Yeah. I remember also feeling like I wasn't normal
Yeah,
and that I was less of a man compared to other men. I
yeah,
would always be like thinking about, oh, I bet, they're really good at sex, and it's like I was just belittling myself,
yeah.
you know, this could be in the gym, it could be at work, conferences, whatever. It felt like a lot of the times it was on my mind.
How much of like the day would you spend thinking about it?
I feel I don't know exactly, but I would say okay, so it was probably something like I would wake up, I would think about it. I remember I would wake up and I would immediately check to see if I was hard. And if I was hard, I'd be like, okay, right, things are good. I don't have actually as much of an issue. So I do these tests, these mini tests throughout the day. And I'd be getting ready for work, probably wouldn't think about it. I'd get to work, then I'd think about it. And then a few hours, and then I'd think about it again, and then going home, in the evening, and then my partner was there, I would think about it. And so it was a lot, okay, it may not have been 90% of the time throughout the day, but it felt that way because of the intensity of the
Yeah,
thoughts. And then I'd also do other things like saying to myself, right, if I can get hard when I'm watching this porn, then I know I don't have an issue. I'd give myself these like mini tests. If I'll just get hard whilst I'm doing this, or if I can just have sex this evening, then I know that things are okay. Things are getting better. And it was all a lie.
yeah,
There were some times fine where I was able to force my way through it or whatever, but um, it was just to try and make myself feel better ultimately, and not face the reality.
yeah. I think one of the interesting things about those tests, so like if you're testing with porn, you're literally worsening the problem.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's also interesting about like the test, even with a partner, is that in my experience, even when it goes well, it doesn't make you feel that much better. You still
No.
worry about the same amount whether it goes well or whether it doesn't,
Yeah.
because that's just because there's something else going on, and that's the thing that has to be addressed.
It's like sex starts to feel like a test. So let's get it over and done with.
Yeah.
rather than something that's enjoyable, something that's pleasurable, something that we can connect over. It feels like more of a test.
Yeah. It's so interesting because the words that guys use almost every time I get on a call with them is "I failed." That's the
Hmm.
word that they almost, and you, what do you fail? You fail tests.
Hmm.
So as far as causes go, I sort of break them into three different categories. I see things that guys learn from like their society or culture, which, you know, guys from India deal with very different cultural, you know, causes than guys from, you know, Western countries oftentimes, as far as like how they learn them, but they're not that different. And then there's sort of like relational problems, and then there's sort of like your own internal problems. Um, and the way that I tend to approach this is that I tend to treat it for the most part as if everything is relational, because it's about your relationship with either yourself or the person that you're having sex with. Like, one of the big breakthrough moments that I had was that I realized that I couldn't solve this problem on my own. I couldn't solve this problem and then have sex. Like, I had to solve it while having sex. And so one of the problems that I see a lot with guys is that, you know, this goes back to something that both Shay and I mentioned, is that we tried to keep it to ourselves. And I think the worst person that you can keep it from is, if you're in a relationship, somebody that you're having sex with, because either they know already, or, you know, because you've
Yeah.
lost an erection, and they know you have a problem, or they're assuming that something's wrong with them because they're insecure. And so, you know, we, neither of us really talked about this when we were sharing our stories, but, you know, for me, communication with the people I was having sex with was one of the really big breakthrough moments for me. So, you know, in the sense of don't, you know, don't try to do this alone. Not only does that mean seek help from people like us, you know, therapists, doctors, whatever you feel like you need, but also like the person that will probably be your biggest ally in this is whoever you have sex with. And that's, even if you're single, that's still true. You can still have the conversations about it to make it better. Um, because the part of what like makes this such a sticky problem in my experience is there's so much shame around it, and nothing will make the shame go away without talking about it. Like, I've had a lot of guys go on calls with me, and after just one call, they're like, I feel so much better just because I'm not alone with this anymore. Like, they're able to just let the feelings out. And if you let the feelings stay inside, they just spin. But yeah, I would say that's probably one of the biggest ones that I see guys making mistakes with. And
So you said those three layers, right? Societal. What were the other two?
societal, relational, and then into like yourself. So
Okay.
societal would be like porn, like normalized porn, guys watching porn every day. For most cultures, is a lot of cultures is a societal thing.
Yeah.
Also, one of the ones that I see as being a big cultural issue right now is like the magnifying, the like glorifying one night stands. I think for a lot of guys, I don't have a moral problem with it. It's just from a purely practical standpoint, most
Hmm.
guys are not wired emotionally to be able to do that, because there is an emotional component to arousal and to sex that I think a lot of guys, they put a lot of pressure on themselves. Like, you know, my friend Bob is able to go out and have sex with all these women. Why can't
Yeah.
I?
Yeah.
And, you know, to me, that's sort of a societal thing. The
Yeah.
relational side would be things like keeping it to yourself. There's also a lot of things that guys put pressure on themselves about are in relation to their relationship. If I lose my erection, then she'll leave me, or she'll cheat on me, or she'll fantasize about my next door neighbor who probably can have sex, and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then the self layer to me is always like, well, I'll speak on personal experience on this one, but I see this a lot with guys that I work with, is that I had misunderstandings of what really turned me on, because a lot of my sexual experience was watching porn.
Yes.
The amount of porn that I watched versus the amount of sex that I had in my life is like so out of balance with reality. And so what that did for me is it really, it masked my arousal mechanism. So I literally didn't know what turned me on. I did not understand that there was an emotional component to sex, because I thought I was a very visual person. And so I focused a lot on, she has to have this kind of butt, this kind of boobs, she has to be this hot. And I totally ignored the emotional connection. And I see a lot of guys who really misunderstand the things that turn them on. And so this to me is like, it's one of the craziest things that you can run into, because if you need a specific thing, like if you need an emotional connection, we'll just use that as an example. If you need an emotional connection to get turned on and you don't have it, and then you're going home with someone that you don't know, and you're going home with them because they're hot, maybe they have the body that you like, you're not only depriving yourself of something you need, you're putting pressure on yourself to get hard in a way that isn't necessarily one of your main arousals. And then you're likely shaming yourself because it's not working. So it's like 3 layers of like really bad things that are working against what you need. And so that's, to me, is sort of the personal level.
I did that so many times.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
So many times.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it became more and more apparent into my, like, let's say, definitely my 30s. I'm 35 now.
Yeah.
And now I can't even really imagine having hookup sex and
Yeah.
things going to plan, because I know that's just the kind of sex for me that doesn't do it
Yeah.
anymore. Whereas before I was, had it, obviously when you're 18, 19, okay, not for all guys, but for many. But then when I think then you start to realize, okay, actually this doesn't feel so good. Maybe we don't realize that, but it starts to show up in different ways. Erection challenges is one of those ways.
Yeah.
So for me, I think how I see it is I agree that there's a combination of things going on. The pattern that I generally see, that it involves something from younger years, which I'll come on to in a second. And then so imagine that as like the foundation. There's something in the younger years that's part of this in some way, shape or form. Then there's also a stacking of different events that have taken place that may not just be sex, that may be in other areas of our life, and then it spills over into the bedroom. Kind of like a mushroom cloud. It like builds up, and then spills out. What I often find, and I'm yet to find an example where this doesn't exist, is when we think back to our younger years, there was often some kind of pressure to perform. And this is usually nothing to do with sex. It could be something to do with sports. It could be something to do with academics. It could be something to do with being compared to other siblings or other children at school, or religion, or whatever it may be, similar to where you're saying there around societal beliefs or cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, family beliefs. This something happens where it feels relatively intense. Doesn't have to mean that we were abused. It doesn't have to be like extremely intense. For some guys, of course, they have unfortunately experienced that. But I think for many of us, we kind of ignore or think our younger years have got nothing to do with this. And the reality, my belief, is that the seeds of anxiety, of like, what if they don't love me because of this? What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't get this right? Whatever the questions are like this, that those seeds are planted at a younger age, of where we actually had those experiences, where there was this authority figure or an attachment figure that didn't give us love in the way that we deserved to be loved in some moments. Doesn't mean all the time, but just in some moments. And that may be the mother, it may be the father, it may be whoever. So I feel like there's that goes on. So that's the younger years. Then this stacking event. And what I mean by this is it may be sex experiences that didn't go to plan. Maybe there was the first few times when we were having sex and got too drunk and I wasn't able to get hard. Or it may be that I wasn't able to get hard and the other person had a really bad reaction. This is, that says that they just say words that are totally inappropriate in that moment, but the words stick with us. Or it may be that we really like somebody, but we weren't able to have sex in the way that we wanted. So it can be that, but it could also be things like family stress, difficult family situations. It could also be business stress over the years of deals that didn't go to plan, or we had to make decisions about the business, or we felt a high degree of responsibility to provide for our family or for the people we're employing. These kinds of things. So there's this stacking of these multiple areas of pressure, And if you're listening to this, just see if this feels like it's true for you or not. There's these other areas of life where we felt a sense of pressure, expectation to perform, very similar types of questions. What if I don't get this right? What if I'm not good enough compared to the other person? What if I'm sacked? Or what if I'm, all of these very similar thoughts, but we often don't connect it with the area of sex. Something then happens that tips us over the edge. It spills over into our sex life. We're not able to get hard, or we get premature ejaculation, or whatever it may be related to performance anxiety. And then we go into that loop, which is a loop of its own, of like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Why has this happened? I'm not normal. And we're not even aware that these other events have had a contribution to that, but we just start to go in our own loop around that. That only honestly takes probably 1 or 2 times if things not going to plan for us to start thinking we have a problem. So yeah, I think for me, that's what I have seen in terms of patterns and commonalities. And one thing that you mentioned, which I totally agree with as well, is the context in which we're having sex is often a huge part of this. That we are having sex or trying to force ourselves to have intimacy in a way that doesn't do it for us. And the question is, are there times where things have gone to plan and times where things haven't gone to plan? And why is that? If there's just erection challenges all the time, yes, it may be still a mindset thing, but I also believe that's when sometimes it could be something is more likely, or let's say there's a higher chance that it could be something medical. But if there are times where things have gone to plan, even if it's 1 or 2 times, you do have evidence that things can go to plan. And why is that? It's likely because we're in the kind of context in which things felt better. We felt safer with the person. We felt more connected with the person. We felt more open and in tune with them. Yeah. And therefore we were able to have more of the kind of sex that we wanted.
There's so many things there I want to comment on. So things that are like really similar with my like experience, and things that are actually very, very different, which is great.
Yeah.
So this was actually when Shay and I were preparing this, one of the sections that I was most excited about was this, because I know we have some different approaches on this. And, they're both valid. It's just different ways of looking at the problem. So I can tell you one thing that I probably overcompensate in the wrong direction is thinking something like I overemphasize probably that things are not medical, because my wife is an MD. And so I hear about this from the most logical, medically minded person that could possibly exist, even though she's very supportive of what I do. But I genuinely believe, so like, I think there were $4 billion in pill sales last year. I would be willing to bet that probably 95% to 98% of those guys don't have a medical problem.
Yeah.
And I'm probably leaning too hard, because I think generally speaking, the medical advice guys get leans too far the other way. And so I'm probably overcompensating, and I'm aware of that. But I personally did not get a natural erection, even while using porn, for 5 years. My genitals shriveled. It would have been really easy for me to stay on the path of this as a physical problem, and it was unfixable. And for whatever reason, I was just stubborn and couldn't accept that. And so for me to think it's a medical problem, I need something to tell me that it is. I can tell you one that I really hate is venous leak. I don't know if you get a lot of guys coming to you talking about venous leaks. I've helped a lot of guys who have had Doppler ultrasounds that said you have a venous leak. And to me, it's complete nonsense, because even in the American Urological Association's documentation, it specifically says that anxiety can override the medications. And there's several studies that have shown a 50%. There was a study that was shown 267 men, I think it was 267, 289, somewhere around there, men who had Doppler ultrasounds that said they had a venous leak, were retested with nothing different, exact same conditions. And 47% of them had a venous leak the second time. So 53% of the people who had a medical diagnosis that said they had a physical problem did not have a physical problem. So, I'm stubborn on this one and I'm going to be wrong sometimes, but like, I really lean into it, even if you have a medical problem, unless you have like a car accident where you have like spinal damage.
Yes.
I will fight for you because I think the role of anxiety is really misunderstood and how powerful it is in this in creating this problem.
So,
Um,
for example, like if there was a guy who came to you who wasn't able to get hard on his own, who wasn't able to get hard during sex, who wasn't waking up with morning erections, you still think this is a mindset thing?
Absolutely. I don't take into account morning. I think morning erections are also completely misunderstood. So first of all, you can be getting erections in your sleep and not know.
Yeah.
So there's a thing called a stamp test that you can take, and a pretty good percentage of guys who think they don't get morning wood take a stamp test, and then it turns out that they're getting erections while they're asleep. But also, that's a very complex topic. If you get morning wood, then I 100% believe your equipment's okay. If
Yes.
you are not getting morning wood, I didn't get morning wood for years. I don't get morning wood that often. I get it a couple times a month because there's not a very high correlation between. I have so many guys who come to me who can get morning wood that can't have sex.
Yeah.
So, you know,
I
so
guess the point that I was getting at there is not so much about the sex, it's more about erections. If somebody is not able to get erections in any scenario, morning wood on their own with a partner.
yeah, I mean, in those situations, if somebody comes to me and they get no erections at all, I'll tell them is I will be honest. It's possible this is a physical problem, but
Yeah.
I personally think exploring from the mental, emotional perspective is much more helpful
Okay.
because, surgeries are replaced. Once you do that, you can't go back. And so what I'll often do is if I have guys, and I've had guys I've had a guy that didn't have erections for almost his entire life, that I helped him get back to being able to have sex. And the reason that the way that I go about that is I say, I don't know if I can help you, but let's see what's happening. And oftentimes if you talk to them about how they think about sex, none of
Yes.
their thoughts are arousing. They don't understand how to have arousing thoughts. And so oftentimes it's just that they have a lot of, kind of sludge in their their emotional and sexual systems. And if you start approaching that from the perspective of it's fixable and you try, like the thing that I think is so interesting about this problem is that because there's so much of it that's not related to sex, even if it ends up being physical, if you did all the things that you would try and do to fix it, you will not be sorry about that because your life will be better. Does that make
Uh,
sense?
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, even when everything shows that it may be a physical thing, 80, 90% of it's a mindset
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
And so even if there was a venous leak diagnosis, the chances are we're still also experiencing some form of performance anxiety.
Yeah.
And without that part sorted, with just the venous leak diagnosis, doesn't really change much.
I had a really heartbreaking situation where a guy who came to me and he'd been to some crazy surgeries in the Ukraine that had messed up his. He flew to the Ukraine before the war started, and he had like two surgeries that were supposed to like mess with something in his vascular, and it just totally messed him up. And like, I think that guys just have such a they think about it so physically, and it's really hard to get out of that mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as well, it's like this, as guys, we think, right, there's a problem, fix it, let me fix it. And
Yeah,
in a physical, so think about this with like I don't know, this is very stereotypical right now, but a DIY or a car or something in the physical world, a
yeah,
phone, a screen that breaks, it's like,
yeah,
right, take it to the repair shop, get the tools to get it fixed,
yeah,
tools to get it fixed. And so we think a similar thing when there's something going on with our body, right? Let's go and get the external thing to fix it.
yeah.
The reality is, in this scenario, most of the time it's internal.
It's the
And that,
software.
yes, and that feels totally unfamiliar, totally unknown. And this is what holds us back.
Yeah,
But at the same time, it's the path forward.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so the stacking of events.
Yeah.
This also, I definitely use different terminology, but it's the same basic idea, which is there's often, I have, and the thing that I want to get into after this relates to the, like, I don't really go back into the childhood kind of stuff. That's not something that I've ever really delved into. And so I would love to hear more about that. But the stacking of events. So I think of it sort of like as the origin or the inciting event, where a lot of times guys lose an erection for some reason.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest like the thing that starts the snowball for a lot of guys, and when I work with guys, where I start at as the origin point is this. Um, so I like the biggest thing that happens is that they lose that erection and they don't understand why.
Yes.
And if you had a conversation, I said this earlier in the call, but if after that day you got on a call with either one of us and you had a conversation about it, the chances of it snowballing into something bigger are very, very low. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree.
And then, so,
I would agree with the caveat of dependent on how they were handling pressure and anxiety in other parts of their life.
okay. Well, I would, I don't discount those things, but I would not put that caveat. I think for most guys, I think if I had a conversation with most guys after they lost an erection the first time, um, they may lose it the next time, but it's not going to turn into what I went through. Would
Yes.
you agree with that? Like, it's not going to probably become a years long problem.
The thing that goes through my mind is like, yes, I do agree with that. And I also think they may experience continuous swings of going in and out of it.
Okay. I'll agree. Yeah, maybe. Okay. We'll talk about that more in a moment, but the thing that I see happen a lot is that guys lose an erection. They don't understand why. And then oftentimes they'll lose an erection again. It doesn't even necessarily have to be the next time. It could be 3, 4, 10, 20 times later, and they lose another erection. And this is the crazy thing. Oftentimes, the reason that they lost their erection the first time and the second time are different. One of them could be like, I was drinking. One of them could be, I was stressed at work, or I was tired, or I wasn't in the mood, or it was a one night stand. And the thing is that because they didn't understand why they lost it the first time, and then they lost it the second time, their mind turns it into, I have this problem. And then from that moment on, that's when they lose their erection because of the idea that I have this problem. Because what happens from those moments on is when they go into sex, they're now anxious. It's a building up of events. And I
Yeah.
think one of the reasons why, I think one of the other problems that I see guys run into is that they look for like an instant fix. They want the thing that'll fix it immediately instead of like understanding that it's kind of a process. And so the reason that it can't oftentimes be fixed in one session, one pill, one whatever, is because there's a series of things that have to be unwound.
I do think to be able to get it sorted in the long term, outside of just the area of sex, so that the guys also have tools to be able to handle,
Mm-hmm.
just take their life to the next level, handle stress and anxiety better as well. Being pushed to perform in a sport, being pushed to perform academically, being pushed to pray religiously, or being just totally disregarded and unloved,
Mm-hmm.
these kind of things. And so as I said earlier, my personal belief is these are the seeds of not good enough. My performance or who I am is not good enough as a person. And so I believe that's why it's important to just spend a bit of time going back and resolving that, so that it doesn't reignite that pathway again.
Let's say a guy comes to you and he was pushed really hard, like it to be a football player or something,
Yeah.
rugby player, whatever. Um, how does that? Can you like give me more of the like how that impacts? Is that like they transfer over to sex, or like what's the
Yes.
like?
So whether it's like, as you said, whether it's sports, music, whatever it may be, similar thought pattern of it's usually somebody that is pushing them to do that. Okay. Sometimes, and I think this is where it doesn't apply, is when they're just, 15, 16 onwards. I'm talking about before this, at the age from 0 to
Mhm.
10 or 12 or something like that. when we're not really making fully our own decisions, when other people are deciding things or pushing us down a particular route. Let me give an example to bring it to life. There was a guy who his mum and dad were musical.
Mhm.
His sister was really good at music. She played the cello. Um, he wasn't too sure if he wanted to do music or not, but the parents would continuously give him pressure of, you need to find the instrument that you like, you need to find the thing that you like. Look at your sister, she's really good at playing the cello.
Mhm.
Why can't you be just like this and just decide what you want to play and become good at it like she is? And
Wow.
so these thoughts then come into our mind of, I'm not good enough, I'm not loved for who I am. Let's say our attachment figure, our parents are our attachment figure.
Mhm.
And then, so when we go into relationships at an older age, this is a totally different conversation, but we replicate
Yeah.
those kind of attachments.
Yeah.
And then erection challenges happen, and all of a sudden, oh, here's that pathway that's just been lit up again of, what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm not loved for who I am? What if they leave me because of this? Because this is exactly how we felt when we were a child, but just in a different situation.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. It's interesting because I've never gone into it from that approach. A lot of times, but I would say that we are probably doing similar things because this to me is in the relational aspect. It's sort of like
Definitely.
the way it sort of shows up in like in their life at that moment is like what are the specific beliefs or pressures that they're putting on themselves,
Yeah.
and like what are ways because is I don't know if this is something that you've like if this is how you view it or not, but like the way it often shows up like when I work with someone is that they're um, it shows up as a belief, like something about a situation they believe is true that often isn't. So, like an example of this would be one of the guys that I was working with. He was a very, we'll just say he was a very generous lover. A lot of the attention was oftentimes um, on his wife, and in that one of his arousal mechanisms was actually having the attention on him. So, like being the center of attention. He's a very like center of attention kind of guy, and but he had like he didn't believe that he was worthy of being in that relationship, and so he felt like he had to give more than he received. Is that the kind of thing that you see as sort of like an echo of something probably from being younger, or is
Yeah.
that completely
I think
different?
that would probably translate into something like, one of his parents didn't feel worthy of being in the relationship, or impressed things onto him about, when you're with somebody, you need to be like this kind of man or this kind
Mm-hmm.
of lover. Um, there's some crazy stories that I've heard. This what another guy who his parents were going through a really rough time, and both his mum and his dad would individually be saying things to him at the age of like 6 or 7. His mum would be like crying on the kitchen floor of like, never treat a woman like this. Your father makes me feel like I'm nothing, and I've given everything to this family, and you never be like this with a woman. And then his dad would be asking him, "Do you think it's okay if I start to see other women?" This is a child. This is a child that's six
Yeah,
or seven. I know this is an extreme example, but it's these small things that we can see our parents distressed, or the things that they're asking us or saying around us. We're picking it up as a pattern, but we don't really know what to do with that. We're not at the age where we can emotionally process that, but yet we learn it as oh, I've got to make sure that I don't um, treat women like that. So let me never have sex with them, because what if I then do treat them like that? And
yeah,
what's a great way to not have sex with a woman is not to be able to get an erection.
yeah. I think the closest thing to that I've seen is a guy who he had a very high sex drive, and his girlfriend didn't, and she always made him feel really guilty about it, and so he asked God to take his sex drive away, and then like 3 months later he had ED, and he had it for like 10 years.
There we go. It's like, exactly, that's a very powerful example. And it sounds, maybe if you're listening to this, that sounds crazy. Or
It
this
does,
is
yeah.
the power of the mind. This
It
is
is. The
literally the
mind's
power of the
amazing.
mind.
Yeah,
Whether it's from a young age or whether it's at an older age, these our mind is in more control of this than we realize.
yeah. I mean, if there's a I've been trying to find the origin of the saying, but there's a saying that the brain is the biggest sex organ.
Yeah.
I've seen it in a lot, like I've seen it traced back even in like the 1920s and 30s, but I can't find the origin of it. And it's true. Like um, and if you don't believe me, watch porn and think about your grandma and see if you get an erection.
Hmm.
You're not
Some
going to.
people might.
Yeah, I mean, well, kinky that, but most of them probably. Generally speaking, when guys have a hard time getting an erection, when they think about sex, they feel terrible, and their sex, like their thoughts aren't actually about like they're not sexual, they're about
Yeah.
sex going poorly. And if you were to like, so one of the things that I used to have guys do, and I don't do this quite as much anymore, but I used to have them write down, like track the thought patterns that they were experiencing around sex during a day, and then I would ask them, and like especially during sexual experiences, and then I would say, okay, could you sit down and masturbate and think about that and get an erection? And the answer is always no,
Yeah.
and it's because they're not arousing thoughts.
Yes. Yeah. So when we think about those thoughts in the build up to sex or even during sex, we're going to
Yeah.
lose the erection.
Uh, to me, the number one thing you can do is to get someone that you can talk to about it. Someone like Shay or I, or a therapist, or a close friend, somebody who would be empathetic, or if you're in a relationship, the person that you're in a relationship with. But it's such a difficult problem to solve on your own, and I mean this literally. I wasted years trying to solve it on my own. So Shay mentioned that 11, I think it was 11th out of 12 business or sessions with his business mentor, he finally opened up. I had a similar experience where I was working with a shaman for a year before I told him what was going on, and he was like, "For fuck's sake, like, why didn't you tell me? We've been barking up the wrong tree." And so I think it's hard to imagine this, but it will literally shave years off of the time that it takes you to solve this problem. It will go from something that where you're at right now, it will take years on your own. Like it took me 7 years, and I didn't even do it on my own. Um, but it's something that can be solved in a matter of oftentimes weeks or months, if you're getting help, and if you're open about it. And some of the guys who are going to be watching this are going to be in places where they have no finances. If you don't have finances, there are still people that you can talk to that will be empathetic. Just don't try to do it on your own. It's
Yeah.
it'll extend it by so much.
The thing that I always say is, when we are going back to that, the bicycle or the swimming pool or getting a promotion, whenever there's something that we want to achieve in an area of our life, we speak to other people about it. We speak to or learn from someone that's done it before, someone that's rode a bike before, someone that's driven a car before, a driving instructor, someone that's played tennis before, somebody that has got the position that we want to achieve. And this is no different, but it feels very different. It feels very different. It feels like, oh, this is something I should be able to know the answers to myself. But how can we? How can we? If something's going on and we don't know how to get it sorted, how can we then also expect ourselves to know the answers for how to get it sorted?
Yeah.
It just seems when we say it like that, it sounds okay. Well, that sounds crazy, but this is what we do to ourselves, and then we go around in this loop and the cycle of torturing ourselves in this trap of I should be able to get it sorted, or maybe now it's getting better, and then it's not, and then we think we should have all the answers. But where are they going to just magically come from when this isn't something that we've had to navigate before?
Yeah. And I had a very interesting experience that like sums up to me why it's helpful to get, and I've actually changed my perspective on this for everything. Like when there's a big problem in my life, I get help, like whatever it is. So I've been doing jujitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, for about 4 years. And at one point I kept getting mounted. So if you don't know anything about jiu-jitsu, the person's basically sitting on top of you. It's a very bad position to be in when someone mounts you. And I kept getting mounted. And so I went to my instructor, who's he's a coral belt. He's been doing jujitsu for literally 50 years. And I told him, I keep getting mounted. What do I do? I keep getting mounted. What do I do? And so he kept showing me ways to like deal with somebody once they were mounted. And then he kept talking about about open guard. And so I kept asking him more questions about mount, and he kept kind of answering them and then going back to open guard. And eventually got really frustrated. I was like, why do you keep talking about guard? I'm trying to understand how to get better at mounting. And he said, you keep getting mounted because your guard's weak.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could have put all the effort in the world into dealing with being mounted, but I was chasing the wrong problem. And I asked one question to a guy who understood the situation, and it the situation improved. Like it was literally months of frustration, and then I asked one question and got an answer, and it got better in like a week.
Mm.
So I think chances are if you're dealing with this problem, you if you understood it, you would already have solved it. And
Yes.
the reason that you're not solving it, like if you knew the things to do, they're not that hard and you would do them. But the problem is you don't actually know the things you need to do. So get help.
Yep. I agree with that. And I would add, as my one thing would be to actually get to the bottom of what is going on for you personally. Not there on the internet, there's many articles, videos, etc. This is one of them. But the reality is, it's all fairly generic advice because we haven't spoken to somebody or done something to understand what is it for us personally. There are different reasons why this shows up. Yes, the symptoms can be the same of erection problems, but how we got there is different. And that's the bit that we have to understand because that then gives the clues for how to be able to get this sorted. And so that would be my recommendation is to avoid the generic advice trap and to start understanding, okay, how can I figure out what it is for me personally that's going on that's led to this, because that then gives the path forward.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree with that more. And I would say that like I can't speak for Shay, but I'm pretty sure this is true, is that the advice that Shay gives on YouTube has to be generic because a lot of people watch it. And it's a very different experience if you have a conversation with him. The questions he'll ask you and you'll give answers, and then he'll ask you more questions about the specific answer that you give. And it's really hard to give advice like that on YouTube because there's so many different ways that it can be caused. But it's still the process of resolving it is still not. It's still find out what's happening and then fix that. And I think
Yes.
when you deal with like meditation's a really common thing that guys get into when they have this problem because it is a mental problem. Meditation is a generalized solution.
Yeah.
It calms your mind down. It can make you more aware. But the thing is that 10 different guys with ED are going to probably have 10 different realizations that are going to get them like moving in the right direction. And it's just, you can't make YouTube content about that.
That's right. Yeah. Um, and as much as maybe, we can search and keep on searching, it's so much quicker to just
Yeah.
book a call with somebody or to have, and this is not even a pitch, it's just genuine from Cam's and my own
Yeah.
experience of what we have gone through here. So, Cam, if there's a guy who's watching this that wants to watch more, learn more about your work, where can they find you?
You can find me on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel called No Pills, No Surgery. My website is nopillsnosurgery.com. And this isn't announced yet, but you're hearing about it here. And if you want to participate, I will be starting a free weekly Q&A session that's available to anyone. So if you go to my website now and get on my email list, you will hear about it when it's announced in the next couple weeks. So you can get help from there. And I do work with guys one-on-one as well. So
Awesome. From my side of things, I'll also put the link to my YouTube channel and my website, which is shay-doran.com. And I'm going to also put in the link to the performance anxiety quiz, which is, we were speaking a moment ago about understanding what it is personally that's going on for you. So this is a free quiz that I give to guys. It's 10 yes or no questions that you answer that will show you, is it performance anxiety? Is it something else? And then what to start doing about it to be able to get that sorted. All of these links or places that we're talking about, by the way, I'll put those in the comments so that if you're watching this, you can just head below to the comments and go there. Well, for those watching, thank you for joining us, and just want to reiterate the point that Cam made right at the beginning of you are not alone. And hopefully that this video has served to go some way to show you that today, that we all, yes, have different experiences and different stories, but this happens to other men. And this is why we wanted to share our story with you today.
and no matter how you're feeling, it's very high likelihood it's a fixable problem, and it is so worth fixing. Like The effort that is required to fix it is so minuscule compared to the rewards that you get for literally the rest of your life. So if you're feeling stuck right now, or you've got a unique reason in your mind why you think your situation isn't fixable, I would say throw yourself in anyway. You know, contact someone, get some help, face it, and find out for sure, because you know it's about so much more than your sex life. It's about,
Yeah.
you know, it's about your whole life, who you are as a person, and it's so intertwined with your happiness and your ability to enjoy life and relationships. And just do it. I promise it's not as bad as you think.